Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast, a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. More about Career Minds after the show. Today, I'm excited to bring you Jillian Climie. Jillian is the co-founder of The Thoughtful Co., a consultancy that supports women in negotiating their compensation and advises companies on improving gender equity in the workplace. At an early age, Jillian has always thought about gender equity and the importance of women being empowered to know their worth. Jillian spent much of her career at Lululemon, where she led the global equity and executive compensation programs before clocking out to start her own company. Now at The Thoughtful Co., she works with women across Canada, the United States, the UK, to negotiate at companies including Uber, Goldman Sachs, Oracle, Sephora, and IBM. Jillian was named as 2022 Emerging Leader by The Peak and was a 2024 Women of Influence nominee. So without further ado, please enjoy Jillian Climie and her clocking out story. Jillian, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited. I was just reflecting before the call, and one of the things that I'm super excited about is the fact that, first of all, we met just, I would say, a few weeks ago. I met you and your co-founder, Sophie. And when I got to meeting you all and really started to learn about your background, it occurred to me that you both have very unique clocking out stories that led you to coming together as co-founders of The Thoughtful Co. And I just thought that was so interesting. And for our listeners, this is part one of a two-part series where you and I are going to have a conversation about your journey, your background, and then we get to meet Sophie next week. So I'm just super excited. But we're starting with you first. So
Nice.
you're the victim.
Sounds good.
So what I like to do is just sort of start from the beginning. I'm curious if you can share where you grew up, a little bit about your family, your parents, siblings, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I grew up in Vancouver in Canada. Really, amazing place to grow up. Ocean, mountains, beaches, all at my access, which I don't think I really appreciated until I left and realized how beautiful it was. But nice place to grow up in an area called Dunbar, kind of close to Kitts Beach. And with my parents, and I had an older brother, Phil. So it was a great environment to grow up in. I think if I think I was just asked in a different interview recently around, when did I get my passion for gender equity and those things that I'm working on now? And I feel like it really did stem actually early within my childhood and in high school. So I had really supportive parents who, a strong mother. He was a really amazing figure. And I think I just always wanted to see that equality in all areas of my life. So it started quite young. But yeah, it was a great, amazing place to grow up in. And I don't live in Vancouver any longer, but I live in Victoria, which is pretty close. Yeah. So still get to go back every once in a while, and it still have the ocean by me, which is something that de-stresses and relaxes me. So very important.
Yeah, I love that. And I was reading online somewhere that British Columbia is one of the best provinces to live in terms of quality of life. Yeah. Low crime, and people are warm and friendly. And so I'm not surprised about that. Would you say that BC is the best province on record?
I would. And I've only lived in two. I've only lived in BC and Ontario. So I went to university in Ontario and then worked in Toronto for a few years after that. Loved it as well. But I think just in terms of more balanced lifestyle, healthy lifestyle. Like you have such easy access to hikes, running routes, all these amazing things. So I think it's a nice balanced place where you can enjoy the beautiful outdoors, which is so therapeutic and de-stressing. But then still a lot of exciting things going on within the corporate space too. So it's a good balance of both.
Yeah, I love that. I'd probably say 20 years ago, my brother and I did a hiking trip up at Whistler
Oh,
and flew in.
nice.
Yeah, we flew into Vancouver and took a bus ride. I think it was an hour and a half north. And it was just absolutely beautiful. I felt like, if I retire one day, this could be like the scene of what I would envision retirement looking like. But I
Yeah.
definitely love being near the water. So that's important to me as well.
Mhm.
But I want to go back though for a moment. You brought up you and your brother, and at such an early age, the equity piece, and I know that that's a big component of the company that you and Sophie run today in terms of pay equity. And I wonder, was there like glimpses of discrepancy at a young age where there was sort of kind of like an unconscious bias, not necessarily from your parents, but just in general, where just comments were made where it was sort of like, that's interesting. Why are they referring to me that way versus my brother? And I just wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it actually was that there wasn't like my parents were so equal with my brother and I always growing up. And then when I went into like I think I remember it most in high school, I started to see some of the inequities within the world. And for example, like I was so furious that there wasn't a women's rugby team. Like there was only a men's rugby team within our high school. And I didn't even want to play, but I wanted to
All right.
start one. So and looking back, like I was incredibly shy as a kid. Like even in elementary school, I was super shy, barely spoke, and came a little bit more into myself in high school. But for some reason, I've always been really fierce on the topic of gender equity, and I don't know like when exactly that started, but it's just been something that's innate in me that yeah, it just has kind of fueled me in many different directions, obviously leading me now to co-found the Thoughtful Co. But I think in high school is where I really started to see yeah, just some of the differences within even like who was speaking up in class and things like that, versus maybe who was preparing. I was that student who was preparing all the time, but then felt so nervous to actually speak up. So yeah, I don't know, like there wasn't a specific moment that I can think that led to it, but maybe it was because there was so much equity within my family and then just kind of experiencing in the
Mm.
world how it's not always that way.
Yeah, I love that. So you're thinking about college. What sort of ideas did you have in terms of what did you want to do, and what led you to majoring in psychology and kind of pursuing the education that you did?
Yeah, so I think I've always been interested in what motivates people to do different things. Even like right now, for example, I'm super into watching all the Netflix documentaries on athletes, like
Mm.
just high performing people in different areas. I'm really interested in what motivates them and how they can excel at that level. So I always had thought about psychology. And coming out of high school, there's all the daunting decisions of what you should want to do with your life. So it felt like psychology was a first something that was a good gut reaction for myself. And then also the program that I went into at in Ontario at Western University, I could early get acceptance into the business program that didn't start until year three. And that was unique for me because I didn't have to say, hey, I want to go into business right away. Like I could try something out and then see if I still wanted to go into the business program if I was accepted into it. So it was a good kind of balance for me of not locking myself into something really early on, but
Mm.
kind of knowing that I likely wanted to go that route. And I did end up getting accepted into the program and starting business school in year three, which is kind of a condensed version at the university that I offered. So it was great getting to do psychology and business. And, I think that's kind of what led me into the HR finance side of what I do, like utilizing both of those skills.
That's so interesting. I have a similar story myself, a little bit different. I initially, when I was graduating from high school, I had a guidance counselor tell me that you would be a great counselor and therapist. And I ended up listening to her and ended up enrolling and pursuing a psychology degree myself. And it wasn't until toward the end of my junior year that I realized being in the healthcare profession and helping people sort of figure out their problems wasn't the direction that I wanted to go. And I started exploring other fields and came across industrial organizational psychology,
Right.
which
Yeah.
I ended up getting a master's degree in. So a little bit different than an MBA. It sounded like yours was much more intentional than mine. I had to sort of think about other fields, and IO Psych was the closest to business that would get me in industry, which is ultimately where I wanted to go. But it's interesting how psychology for a lot of professionals is an entry point into some aspect of the human resource field. And it seems like that was the case with you.
Yeah, I that was the part that I loved in psychology. And that's what kind of led me into business school as well. Like I knew that I was really interested in like high performing executives at companies and how to motivate and retain them and all those types of things. So that kind of led me into business school, but I do think like in my career some of the things I learned in psychology, I used a lot more than what I actually learned in business school. Like,
Mm,
I think business school really taught me to speak up, to how to communicate better, which was helpful for me coming in as quite shy. And then obviously going into the workforce where speaking up and communication is so important. But I do think some of the concepts that I've learned in psychology, I still use to this day. And it's some of the most interesting part of my schooling experience, I think.
sure. Can you share an example of something that really is from the standpoint of something that you use within psychology? I'm curious if you could share an example of something.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of what I did in my career is compensation, specifically with executives. So, how do you motivate and retain executives who are? It's kind of a weird world at an executive level. Public companies for big companies, like they are almost like sports players in a way. Like like they're
Mm,
being poached by all the top companies. They're being moved around. They're being offered all these amazing things. So, how do you really make sure they feel good about being at the company and stay there for the long term? And so a lot of what we did, of course, was through compensation incentives like long term equity programs, bonus structures, salary, all that good stuff. But I think where I brought my psych into it as well is, beyond the money, are these people actually feeling valued in the
mm,
workplace, and how do we show that to them outside of monetary incentives? Because at a certain level, it's not about the money anymore. It's about, do they feel like the organization cares and values them and are,
all right.
including them. And I think that's where I took, a little bit more of an HR lens to sometimes a finance heavy role, where it's like, yes, we have to make sure we have the baseline compensation in place so they're not poached by, Microsoft or whoever is trying to buy them out. But are they feeling good and happy about being at work? And do they feel like the CEO, the board values them? And that's
Mm.
the intangible side where an executive will stay long term with a company versus jumping around. So I think, yeah, just around the motivations of high performing talent, I do remember that from the organizational behavior side of psychology. And
Wow.
it's interesting. I haven't really thought about that. I've used that until you brought up that question,
Yeah.
but it's cool. It's kind of full circle.
Yeah, it is full circle. And I wonder, was it when you graduated in from your MBA, were you focused on compensation as a function of HR when you graduated, or did you get into HR and then decide comp and is the focus, or executive comp was the direction you were going to go?
Yeah, so I and it wasn't HBA. It wasn't an interesting program where it was an accelerated HBA and you could do a prior degree before. So but kind of what came out of that was, business school recruiting is intense. Just full stop, right? It's like investment banking, consulting, accounting, like everyone's going for the same roles. And I kind of chose consulting broadly because I felt like that was, a mix of different things. And then I found this consulting firm that specialized in executive compensation consulting.
Yeah.
So it was that mix of, finance, which I do love, and getting into the numbers and structuring things that way, but also the motivation side. So it was kind of like a mix of HR and finance, and that's where I started my career. And all of our clients were board of directors. So it was like, looking back, I feel so lucky that that's where I started. Right away as an analyst, I got to work with board of directors of some of the biggest companies in Canada. And of course, not leading those meetings or anything like that, just taking notes in the meeting room. But right away, I got to see how like the highest levels of companies operate. which was really a great start to my career. And I loved executive compensation. It was really interesting. And then ended up going in-house at Aritzia, Canadian retailer, and then Lululemon. So like part of it was falling into it in the recruiting madness and then really liking it. But I did have that balance of finance and HR that most other firms couldn't kind of have both that I saw.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I think about just like you said, management consulting in general, whether it's McKinsey or Deloitte, where you come out of your MBA program. It sounds like would you give advice to college grads who are thinking about specializing in a certain field internally? If you can get with a management consulting firm, whether you're working in human resources, finance, tax, audit, whatever the case may be, it seems like your experience really led you to two things. One, it accelerated your level of acumen because you had this exposure to C-suite level boards of directors, but it also gave you a variety of different companies that you were working with. So you had sort of an outcome of two things that probably made you incredibly valuable to a company who wanted to hire you at that specific focus. And I wonder if it sounds like as you look back, you would give anyone advice if you can start in a consulting firm first, and then ultimately a lot of people end up at one of the clients. They get poached to work for one of the clients. So I wonder if that advice would ring true.
Yeah, I did. I thought it was such great exposure, like you said, to so many different types of companies. And you're learning so much. I think consulting ultimately helps me be a better entrepreneur as well, because within consulting inherently, especially at the McKinseys and BCGs, like, yes, you have a broad specialization, but you're often learning things on the fly with a client and advising on them. So it is really an exercise of, you don't have to be an expert at everything to do things. You can learn on the fly and understand research, look at best practice, and then reflect that back. Which is interesting because I think so many people that I've worked with throughout my career have felt nervous to try things or put their hand up for opportunities because they're not an expert in that space. But every job I've had, even when I went in-house from consulting, I was doing executive compensation, so same field, completely different for in-house than advising board of directors, than like leading, like helping negotiations in-house at a company. So I learned, like, I definitely had used some of my skills, but you learn so much on the fly. And you can, as long as you have confidence and can take the ups and downs and know there's a learning curve with it. I think that's been something that consulting has really taught me, and it has enabled me to have more success in my career because I haven't been nervous when I didn't know 100% what I was doing going into something.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so you're at the consulting firm. I saw that you've grown from analyst to associate over a period of time. And I wonder, was your move to leave the consulting firm to go in-house, was that a recruiter reaching out to you, or was it intentional? Were you not looking? Or I just wonder what that transition was like.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about leaving. Like I knew I wanted to try in-house at some point. And I was living in Toronto at the time and had come home to Vancouver for a holiday break. And a recruiter from Aritzia had reached out to me. So I just had an intro meeting. I was like, I'll just grab a coffee with them while I'm here. They ended up offering me a job on the spot, like offer letter on the
Oh, wow.
spot. And I don't know, I think there was like a 5-day sign period or something like that. Like, it was just crazy. Looking back, I felt so pressured at the time. I definitely would tell myself to negotiate that and
Oh my
wait.
gosh. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Jillian, that
Yeah.
you're kind of like, you probably didn't follow every piece of advice that you tell any
Oh yeah.
woman today who's a value. Never accept an offer on the spot. That
Totally.
is,
And even the fact like that they gave me an op, like there was just a bit of red flags. Like they were really, really understaffed.
hmm,
So anyway, I took it back to Toronto. My now husband was who I was living with, had just quit his job in investment banking actually, and was working for a startup, so much more flexible. And I just said like, should we do this? And we just said yes. And so I signed the offer. His sister actually was giving birth to her same baby at almost that same time. So we flew to Texas, where he's from. I signed the offer, and then so anyway, it was a very hectic period of time. But it's so interesting. I'm very like structured and type A in my day to day. I know I'm blocked like, minute to minute almost, but for big life decisions, I'm kind of like gut reaction. Let's just do it. And so was my husband. So, and my family was here. My friends were here. So it wasn't like, we had a big community. Long story short, I signed the offer and moved. So it wasn't completely intentional. I was knowing that I wanted to make a move in house. So it wasn't out of nowhere. But yeah, it was a little bit more sporadic.
And it sounds like, Jillian, it sounds like it got you back home too.
Yeah.
It was, they probably provided a relocation package for you to some degree. And it was nice that the two of you could move back west. And you probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but you were probably thinking that, hey, if this doesn't work out, I can always make a change later, right? I'm sure that probably crossed your mind as well.
Totally. I think with executive compensation, it's such a niche skill. Like there's not that many people that have really good expertise in it in Canada. So it's enabled me to have more confidence in those decisions because I know I can get another role if I need to. But the point you brought up on Vancouver, like that was the biggest blessing of that move, which I didn't even really think about at the time. It got me back to Vancouver, and I'm much closer with my family now, which is so nice. And just a completely different lifestyle. Like we didn't think about it at the time, but in Toronto, we were working all the time, going out for dinners, like just a very different lifestyle. And I can picture my life there. Like we thought about buying a townhome there and in the city and raising kids. And now we look at our lifestyle now, Vancouver and now in Victoria, which is a little bit outside Vancouver, just a little bit slower paced and still, my husband and I value work and working hard, and that's kind of a core value for us, but it isn't our entire life, where I feel like in Toronto, it was pretty all consuming our job. So that was a blessing in disguise we didn't really think about.
Well, and also I think if, there are students listening who are at the point of graduation and they're thinking about whether I go to college local or I go away to college. In your particular case, you went across Canada. You move to London, Ontario, go to Western, and you end up finding a job, live in a big city. So you experience that in Toronto, and you work crazy hours for a consulting firm. You prove yourself, and then ultimately it took you back home. And I think there's something to be said for that versus consider, I wouldn't say it's safe, but, going to the local college and staying local, and, you just close yourself from so many opportunities. And so, as I reflect on it, it sounds like it was really good across the board.
Yeah, I also think it just gave me such a different perspective. Like I did grow up in a little bit of a bubble and in happy, beautiful Vancouver. And like I reflect now just meeting so many different people at school, and my just mindset expanded so much. And then even since then, going to different companies, and now at the Thoughtful Co, meeting so many different types of people, you just realize how much of a bubble sometimes you can be in. So that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, for me. And also realizing my privilege and everything as well, like being able to go across the country and all those types of things. I'm so grateful that I was able to do that, and meeting different people who, have helped me in different ways and enabled me to figure out what I want to do as well.
So you're at Aritzia, you're in your role, you move back. What was that like in terms of the company, and what kind of impact were you able to make there?
Yeah, so I think Aritzia was a shock of me coming from like best practice consulting and then moving in-house to a company who was founder led, does things quite like within HR, they do things in a very unique way, Aritzia way. Like other founder-led companies, they often have like really bold HR that they like to do things their own way. So that was a big shock for me of like coming from all this best practice stuff and then all of a sudden being responsible for leading compensation in a way that was very different than I'd done it before. So it was a really good learning curve to understand what it's like to be inside a company. I think I had the mindset of like, oh, it will be so easy. Like consulting, you kind of have this like ego, you're working on Bay Street, all this stuff. And then you're like, oh, this will be so easy. I'm going to work a 9 to 5. I'm sitting in HR. It's going to be super chill.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. It was a lot of hard work. It's a high performing company. And I was leading like exec and global comp for all their employees. So it definitely was, I think, a good learning experience for me to realize it can be, really tough to, long hours inside a company still. But I met such great people there, and there's a lot of really senior women leaders at Aritzia, which was really nice to learn from and kind of model after as well. I think in my consulting firm, it was quite diverse, but at the top it was all male leaders. So that was my first experience working with a lot of really powerful women, which I think had a big benefit on my career.
Yeah, sounds like it. And also, when I think about the fact that you mentioned that you were working for a founder-led company, small company, you probably learned some nuggets there that played forward in the Thoughtful Co., in terms of when I have my company one day, I'm going to do things a little bit differently, or, in terms of the culture. And we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I want to take a little bit of time here and talk about your transition to Lululemon.
Mhm.
And what an experience. How in the world did that come about? I'm just fascinated to know how that opportunity came to you.
Yeah, so they had reached out to me a few times. Well, actually, maybe while I was in consulting. I think maybe the first time was either while I was in consulting or at Aritzia. And I had always chatted with them, and it was a nice team, but I was happy where I was. And ultimately at Aritzia, I wasn't aligned with how they were doing compensation in some areas, and I decided I didn't want to be there anymore. And so I decided to quit, and I really thought about like, I think I want to do something other than executive compensation. And just thinking about what I was doing for the world, right? Like pay inequity, things like that. Like so much of executive compensation is interesting work, but it's also helping to facilitate this system where executives do keep making more and more and more over time. So I think, bring it back to my family. My family is such a like do good for the world. My mom used to be in finance and then moved into nonprofit. My brother has worked for a lot of social impact organizations. So I think that's kind of ingrained in me as well. I want to do something positive for the world. And I
Mm,
just was feeling like I'd been in the system exec comp for a while. I didn't want to keep doing it for the next 20, 30 years. So I ended up quitting Aritzia, just taking time off and saying I want to completely reassess. And I did a bit of contract work for like a venture capital firm to see what that would be like. And then I was reached out to by Lululemon again, and I took a meeting and I just loved the team. I loved the head of HR. I loved all the people. And I was like, I was going to leave executive compensation. Can I do it in this really niche way where I am working with the board, doing all the compensation committee prep, and doing things like bonus structure design and really the highest level strategic work that I liked. And they said yes. And so anyway, I ended up staying in executive compensation and joining with Lululemon, which was such a great move. Like it's an incredible company. Some of the best leaders I've ever worked with. Love the CEO. I think he's incredible. And I really became a leader at that company. So glad I did it. But again, it was not totally intentional. Like I genuinely had planned to leave executive compensation and then went right back into it.
that is so interesting. And I read online that Calvin McDonald was born in London, Ontario.
Yeah.
He went to Western. I
Yeah.
wonder if that played into your decision of going to work there.
Yeah, not at the time. But I will say, like, kind of randomly in my career, I've met so many CEOs just given what I do, and I am so impressed by him. He's the best CEO I've ever worked for. I think he, um, yeah, just really puts culture first, which is kind
Mm.
of Lululemon's sweet sauce. But to see that in practice in his decisions during the pandemic when retailers were struggling, a lot of companies laid off employees. Lululemon chose not to. With how he prioritizes diversity, equity, inclusion, with how thoughtful he is when he makes decisions around motivating employees. Like I really valued him as a leader. And of course, not that I was working directly with him, but I got to be in so many meetings with him, which I feel lucky for. So I think when you're talking about modeling leadership now in my startup, I definitely would take from him, some of the things I learned there.
Yeah, I love that. I have a couple of things that are swirling through my mind. One is you said the word thoughtful like three times
Oh, did
in
I?
that last answer, and I just now it's starting to make sense how thoughtful Calvin was in how he ran his company. I'm sure how he treated his employees, the culture. And I have to say, first of all, my daughter, who's a senior in college, um, we probably should own a part of Lululemon because I think she has every style of legging,
Yeah,
whether it's the running, what have you. And so, um, yeah, I see Lululemon like everywhere in my house. So
nice.
it's definitely part of our family. But so, in terms of the work that you were doing there, how much of that is ingrained in the work that you're doing now? Because it sounds like it was like the perfect job. It's a global brand, a fast growing company, and you're working in executive comp. And I guess it's a two-part question. One is um, how is the work aligned with what you're doing now, and why did you leave?
Yeah, I think so. Within Lululemon, a lot of the work I did was kind of board compensation committee level, but then I also helped with setting compensation packages and negotiating compensation with executives that were incoming to the company. And I'd done that at Aritzia as well and in consulting, but got to just a different like landscape. As you mentioned, it's global. We operated in the UK and Asia, in US and Canada. So it was just more at a global scale. And through that experience, I just saw so many women coming into roles and leaving money on the table, like not knowing what to negotiate for, and maybe pushing a bit on salary, but missing out on sign-on bonuses, stock options, equity compensation, severance, like all these other pieces that you can negotiate, especially at that executive level. And I remember some candidates just coming in and knowing to negotiate within like multi-year equity structures that they had looked up in our public disclosure and knew what to get in. Like it just was, there was such a differential. And there was always kind of in the back of my mind, like I have this unique knowledge and education that I could support people with negotiating. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind. And now at the Thoughtful Co., I do support on that side. So I support individual women at the executive level negotiating, and I can do the same analysis that a board of director looks at to determine a C-suite's pay. I can do that for an individual. So I'm able to pull in publicly disclosed executive compensation to kind of do a full report for them so they know basically exactly what to ask for. And we also support women all the way down to a more junior level. So a new
Mm.
college grad who's negotiating for the first time, typically that's more focused on salary, bonus, title, allowances, things like that. But get to support women at all levels. So that's kind of how I use that skill set, and it works, to be honest. Like it can be so simple to get, especially an executive, like a $500,000 sign-on award because you're leaving behind a bonus payout at your previous employer, and they just wouldn't think to ask for that. So
Mm.
some of the outcomes are substantial, and it's really helping to close the gender pay gap. That's our ultimate mission, which is easier said than done. But that's kind of how I use that skill set. And then on your other question of why I left, I think I still, you know, what I had at Aritzia too, like I knew I didn't want to be in-house doing executive compensation forever. But it was my favorite part of HR. Like there wasn't another side of HR that I really um, felt like I wanted to try to like move to within Lululemon. I also was a bit burnt out. It was through the pandemic. We did an acquisition of Mir at Lululemon during the pandemic. So, and I led the compensation for that, which is one of my favorite things I've done in my career. It was so interesting, but just a ton of work and managing a team throughout the pandemic. There definitely was burnout playing into that as well. And I just felt like I needed a reset, and I again wanted to take time off. So I quit. And anyway, that slowly led me to co-found the Thoughtful Co., which wasn't entirely intentional, but always in the back of my mind. And I think I just needed to give myself the space to be like, it's okay to take a risk on this. And really glad I did. So I love Lululemon. It truly was heartbreaking to leave, but there was something again in my gut. I was like, it's just my time. I got to try something new.
Wow. Kudos to you. That's so inspiring. The two jobs that you've had, Aritzia, Lululemon, you were at a place where you were thoughtful. I love that, how that word thoughtful plays forward around the timing of when it makes sense for you to make a move. And I just feel like that's so inspiring. And where do you feel like that sort of self-awareness comes from? That, I mean, I can't think of one person I know who's left two jobs in their career on their own terms and didn't have something to go to. I mean, that takes, in my mind, that takes a lot of courage, because you feel like most people are like, I'm not going to leave my current job unless I have something to go to. And there's that fear of the unknown, of being able to trust your intuition and know that there's something on the other side, that making that choice, be bold, take a risk, and really care for myself first, and not be so consumed with what that next thing's going to look like. And I want to highlight that, because I feel like that's like, there's a lot of courage to do that. And I wonder where that comes from.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's strange for me even hearing that, because I am quite risk averse. Like I'm not like a risk taker in my day-to-day life, but for some reason it is those big decisions. And I think it is, how I grew up. My parents just always gave me so much confidence in myself and my ability and what I can do. And I think I just have this like limit where I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I'm like, nope, this is not serving me. Like I need to take a step back and reassess. And yeah, I think that's because I've been at companies where, other people in the organization were not happy there and we were both talking about it. And then, I've left and I look and it's been like 6 years later and they're still there. So I think there's something about, following my gut on it. And then I also think I do have this specialized skill set where I've always said to myself, like, worst case, I can go and get a job in executive compensation. I feel pretty confident about that. So I think that specialized skill set has helped me. Not that I've actually tested it out and, maybe it would have been harder, but has given me kind of like a safety net of if I need to, make money, I can find a way to do that, even within like consulting for companies. Like I did that a little bit when I stopped too, just to have a bit of cash inflow of just consulting in that area. So I think that my niche skill set enabled me to do that. And then I'm still shocked in a way that I've done it as well too. So I'm not exactly sure where it came from.
Yeah. And I think that as you're running your company and you're working with women to optimize their compensation, or you're working with organization, that confidence really comes through. And I think that people see that and really appreciate your experience and what you bring to the table. So, so you're now a co-founder of the Thoughtful Co. And I wonder how that even came about. So a lot of people that I have conversations with who kind of take the step in entrepreneurship, I would say the majority of individuals go at it alone. Now, we obviously know that a lot of the most successful brands out there, such as Apple and Google and Microsoft, there's always, co-founders that, start the company. And I wonder what led you to determining that you were going to be a co-founder and ultimately found your co-founder.
Yeah, so that was again not the most intentional moves, but really, so I had quit Lululemon, was taking some time to do things outside of the corporate world. So I was taking guitar lessons. I like bought a keyboard piano, which now sits under my bed, and I haven't touched it. My husband's like, "This was a waste of money." I wrote poetry. Like I really was trying to just like, I felt like I had gone so hard with the corporate world for the past 10 years. I just wanted to take a breather to be like, am I creative? Like, can I do other things?
Yeah.
And part of that, I'd always wondered if I'd wanted to be a journalist. That was something I still think like journalism is the most incredible role and so essential in our world. So part of it was I just kind of started a website as a blog type of thing called The Thoughtful Co. And, a week before that, my now co-founder, Sophie, had reached out to me asking if I wanted to go for dinner. And truly on the day we went for dinner, I created the website, which is now our homepage still to this day, The Thoughtful Co. And we went out for sushi dinner in Vancouver, and she just wanted to see kind of where I was at after leaving Lululemon. She had just stepped down from the board of a nonprofit she had co-founded called Women in Consulting Engineering. So supporting gender equity within engineering. And we, through that dinner, decided to start a blog together called The Thoughtful Co., where we kind of held each other accountable to writing articles on gender equity. And that slowly, like, I don't even remember exactly how, but it slowly snowballed into what The Thoughtful Co. is today. Kind of serendipitously, I had a former business school colleague reach out to me asking me to help them negotiate their first exec level offer. And I took it kind of as a sign of like, I can do this and I can do it for women, which is something that I'm passionate about. And yeah, it slowly snowballed into what it was today. So it really started as a blog and not like a super intentional like co-founder relationship. It was like we're writing a blog together.
Right. I think that I love that story because in the world of marketing today, it's all about creating content. When you think about how consumers purchase things today, they do their research, they read things online versus gone are the days where you want to buy a car and you go on the lot and you say, hey, I want to buy a new car. And then they ask you a bunch of questions. Now consumers go right to the internet and they're Googling certain keywords and they're finding content. And so the fact that you and Sophie decided to write a blog, you're essentially creating content for people to read that ultimately, it's like they're coming to you. And so it's brilliant. I love it. It's
Yeah, not the most intentional, and we still do it to this day, actually. Like we release articles every other week, which is tough because we're now running a company and super busy, but it's kind of how we started and it's fundamental. It like also is a way for us to get our passion out on certain like new issues that are coming up and things like that. So it's been really great for traction, yeah, to hear about us. And also, yeah, it's how we started it. So we try to keep it up.
That's great. Well, share a little bit more about the Thoughtful Co. You mentioned a couple of times, and I say that you're closing the gender pay gap one offer letter at a time. And
Wow, love it.
yeah, I like jotted down that note, and I was thinking about what's the and so I wonder. I know you work with individuals. You also consult with companies who are trying to close the gender pay gap within their organizations. And I wonder if you can share a little bit more about how you're serving individuals and companies. And is it, kind of a 50-50, or are you slanted more toward individuals versus companies? I wonder if you can share a little bit more about your company and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, definitely. So, within our kind of employer consulting, that really is helping them build more inclusive workplaces. So that can range from, helping companies structure more equitable hiring processes, compensation processes, promotion processes. So really to reduce some of the bias that comes into our decision making. Because at the end of the day, we're all biased. I'm biased, you're biased, all the listeners are biased. So we are more likely to hire and promote and compensate people who are like us. Than people who might present differently to us. So we try to create more objective HR structures to limit some of that bias, and then help with things like building mentorship and sponsorship programs, employee resource groups for women, leadership coaching around the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, just to build more inclusive workplaces, which ultimately helps company performance. Like we know when we have more diverse teams, there's better financial performance, more innovation, more long-term success, creativity. So there's a great business rationale for it as well. Of course, it's the right thing to do, but also a great business rationale. And then on the individual side, it really is, everything from just one-on-one coaching before entering a negotiation to looking through a compensation package and identifying where you're low against market, to contract reviews and financial modeling of things like stock options and RSUs. So quite a range of what we do there, depending on the level of the employee going into the role. And we tailor each, some want more support on how to negotiate, some just want more support on data. So it really depends. And then kind of a stream of our business that straddles both of those is our workshops. So we do workshops globally on negotiating compensation. So we'll do that with MBA classes, for example. We did that at Oxford University or here in Toronto at Rotman. But we'll also work with companies and women's group inside companies to support them in advocating for themselves. So we've done that at Nokia, Stantec, Legcore, so different organizations as well. So kind of a balance of trying to serve companies and enable more equity through that, but then also supporting individuals as well. And in terms of the split, it honestly fluctuates with the market. Sometimes recruiting's busier, sometimes consulting's busier, sometimes our workshops are. So it's nice we kind of have those three different streams, which has enabled us, I think, to be successful when one is less busy than the other. So definitely recommend that for any founders out there, multiple business revenue streams.
That's great. And what's your role in terms of what you're focused on at the Thoughtful Co versus your co-founder, Sophie, who we're going to hear from next week?
Yeah. So we share a lot of our work. And I think Sophie and I really love that we can add a different perspective. Like she leads our consulting in terms of she has that lived experience in engineering and construction, which is the industries that we focus on, and has done that work inside engineering firms for her whole career. But then I can come in and bring the HR side of it to make sure we're doing things from a structured HR practice perspective, which enables that equity. So we get to do that together. She leads that side of it. I lead the negotiation side of what we do for coaching women, but she supports with so much of it as well. Having that lived experience, working with so many women in engineering and starting a nonprofit, supporting women in that space to bring, beyond the education, like data structure side that I bring, she also brings like, how can we coach them to feel confident going into that negotiation? So we really leverage both of our strengths and do a lot of the work together, which is really nice. And then we also own kind of like different portfolios. I do a bit more of our internal finance. She does a bit more of our internal marketing. And it's kind of been a natural split. Like I genuinely feel so lucky. We have different interests, but work in very similar manners. So like I know co-founder relationships can be such a like intense part of founding a business, but we got so lucky that we have these different interests and work really well together. So it's been quite natural for us, which is nice.
That's great. And I'm looking forward to my conversation with Sophie next week. Jillian, as we wrap up here, first of all, I want to say thank you. I can't believe that we're already at an hour. Yeah. It seems like the time is going by so fast. And kudos to your success so far with the Thoughtful Co. I absolutely loved hearing, and your clocking out story, from my perspective, was kind of at least twofold, maybe threefold, where you left management consulting and then went in-house. You left Lululemon and started your own company as an entrepreneur. So kudos for that. And I'm excited to hear about Sophie's story, which is completely different from her perspective, and how you all serendipitously just came together and have it's sort of like just a beautiful connection, and the work that you're doing in the world is fantastic. I would encourage anyone who's listening today to check out your company. And so share your website. We'll have it in the show notes so people can find your information. But for those listening, what's the easiest way to find your website? What's the web address?
Yeah, so we're at thethoughtfulco.net, and then we're also on LinkedIn, just The Thoughtful Co, or Instagram at thethoughtful.co. Always like to hear from people interested in what we do. So open to all comments or emails or anything like that.
Awesome. And I already followed you on Instagram, so I'm looking forward to seeing your future posts. And so thank you again. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and leadership development services. You can learn more about Career Minds at careerminds.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future, and think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.